Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to another edition of Bigfoots Pad Paranormal Radio. On the phone with us tonight, Stanton Friedman joins us. And on the line with me tonight, I have two of my team members, and Stanton is with us already. How are you doing today, Stanton?
Oh, pretty good here in beautiful Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada.
I know we had you on our show about a year ago, probably about 8 months to a year ago. We already have a lot of questions from last time that people were sending us, and we have a couple of our own. I guess for people that weren't tuned in last time, I was going to see if you could talk a little bit about your background for a couple of minutes, and then we'll get started.
Okay. Grew up in New Jersey, attended Rutgers for 2 years, University of Chicago for 3, got bachelor's and master's degrees in physics, spent 14 years in industry working on the development of a wide variety of advanced nuclear and space systems. Most of the programs were eventually canceled. I think I set a record for working on canceled government-sponsored programs. General Electric on nuclear airplanes, Westinghouse on fission rockets, or General Nucleonics on fusion rockets, several other companies on compact nuclear reactors. I got interested in flying saucers in 1958 by reading Edward Ruppelt's book, read a whole bunch more books, gave my first lecture in 1967. Since I've spoken at more than 600 colleges and 100 professional groups in 50 states, 9 provinces, and 16 other countries. My 5th book is coming out next month, Science Was Wrong. The first 4 dealt different aspects of the UFO problem. Crash at Corona, the definitive study of the Roswell incident, Top Secret Magic, about Operation Majestic 12 documents, Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience, about that story, co-authored with Kathleen Martin, who's Betty's niece. And my last one, before the new one, was Flying Saucers and Science. These are all on my website, www.stantonfriedman.com, and the new one is Science Was Wrong. A lot of examples of smart scientists saying stupid things that stood in the way of progress in many different areas, medicine and aviation and space and so forth. I'm outspoken. I've done hundreds of radio and television shows, been on Larry King a total of 4 times. I take a straightforward stand, really, that some UFOs are alien spacecraft, that we're dealing with a cosmic Watergate, which means that some few people within governments have known since at least 1947 that some UFOs are alien spacecraft, that there are no good arguments against these 2 conclusions, and that we're dealing with the biggest story of the past millennium. So I'm not an apologist ufologist. I'm not a closet ufologist. I do a monthly column for UFO Magazine and for the MUFON Journal. I get around. I'm getting old, but we're still going at it.
Today's actually my birthday, which is ironic.
Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to start off with Roswell, since that's what we have the most questions about. I was just wondering, do you get the most questions about Roswell in general?
Oh, it varies. I normally talk about Roswell in my lecture, and it just depends. In Flying Saucers and Science, there's 1 chapter on Roswell. There's 1 chapter on interstellar travel, which is another big topic. There's another one on the evidence, which most people are unaware of. So it just depends. Roswell is popular. Well, I'll be there first part of July again for the annual festival in the city. Lots of people come there.
How did you initially find out about Roswell, since it was classified until the 70s?
Well, that is and isn't true. There's a yes on that, on both directions, a yes and no. It is mentioned in Frank Edwards' book, Flying Saucers, Serious Business, about a half a page, and he's got everything wrong. But I first heard in the early 70s a woman named Lydia Sleppy, who was working at a radio station in Albuquerque, told of having a call from their Roswell affiliate about a saucer had crashed and was going to be shipped to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and wanting her to put the story out on the wire. And she was doing that, and suddenly a bell goes off and the message comes through, do not continue this transmission. And she asked the guy on the other end, who was in Roswell, what do I do now? He said, stop. So she did. And she remembered some names from some of the people. I heard that in the early 70s. This was in 47 she was talking about. But I could only go so far, and I ran against a stone wall. But the real big impetus came in 1978. I was at a television station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, supposed to do 3 interviews before speaking that evening at Louisiana State University. And I'd done the first 2, and the third reporter was nowhere to be found. The station manager was giving me coffee. He was looking at his watch. He was embarrassed. He knew the person who brought me to the station, and he knew I had other things to do. And so out of the blue, he says, the guy you ought to talk to is Jesse Marcel. And brilliant investigator that I am, I said, who's he? And his next sentence floored me. He handled wreckage of one of those saucers you're interested in when he was in the military. What? That was totally unexpected. And tell me more about him. Well, he lives in Houma. I didn't know where Houma was. I've been there since. Pretty good-sized town in Louisiana. And I was there to interview Jesse, of course. But he's a great guy. We're old ham radio buddies. You really ought to talk to him. And then the reporters showed up. We had a great crowd that night at the university. The next day from the airport, I was there a little early. I called information, got a number for Jesse, called him, told me a story. See, he's one of the few people who couldn't deny his involvement. As it turns out, it was in newspapers all over the place, from Chicago West, really, in July 8th, 1947. And I didn't see it then. No, I was a young lad at the time. And so I shared that information with Bill Moore. We found Bill went to the University of Minnesota Library because Jesse didn't have an exact date, but I had a second story up in Bemidji, Minnesota, at the State College there. I was giving a lecture, and somebody said, ever hear about a crash saucer in New Mexico? And I said, yes, tell me more. I got names of people to follow up on, which I did, and which was a good story, and shared that with Bill. We had known each other in Pittsburgh, Bill Moore. And he had a third story about an English actor driving across the country from L.A. to Philadelphia. Huey Green was his name, who heard on the radio about a flying saucer crash in New Mexico. Now, this was in Flying Saucer Review way back in the 50s. He could pin down the date, early July 1947. Bill went to the University of Minnesota Library, that's where he was living at the time, and found the articles and had Jesse's name and a lot of other names, and it got us really started. Verified what he had said. It was in evening papers from Chicago West. That leaves out the New York Times and all the morning papers on July 8th. The cover story came out a few hours later. So the Times had the cover story on July 9th. But once we had that paper, the backup, this really happened. Something happened. When the only atomic bombing group in the world puts out a story saying they recovered the wreckage of a flying saucer, that's something you got to pay attention to. It took, in the next year and a half, Bill and I found 62 witnesses. The next 5 years, we found another 30 or so. So we had good people. Not only was the 509th, the group in Roswell, the only atomic bombing group in the world. This isn't a bunch of dinks sitting around with nothing to do. Major Marcel was the intelligence officer for that group. I managed to locate retired General Thomas Jefferson DuBose, who was the chief of staff for the head of the 8th Air Force, General Roger Ramey, and he told us what he knew. He was in his 80s, and as he said in our last conversation, what can they do to me now? His picture was in the newspapers, too, with phony wreckage in General Ramey's office. So it took a lot of digging, an awful lot of work, and this was before the Internet. Finding people wasn't easy. You don't go to 411.com.
Yeah.
So that certainly, I mean, I gave my first lecture in 1967. I'd already been speaking for more than 10 years when I got into the Roswell business, if you will. But it's a good, solid case. The nasty, noisy negativists have put out all kinds of nonsense about it. One of the debunkers said, oh, that was just a phony story put out by the public relations guy at the base. He didn't even know his name. I'd known him for 20 years when he tried to pass off that cockamamie story. And so, you know, none of the objections stand up. But remember, debunkers don't care about the facts. They care about pushing an agenda. And the facts are the last thing they want to know. They know the answer. They don't need to do any research.
Well, another question that was coming in was, this is kind of my personal question also. We actually had Nick Redfern on the show before, and I didn't know about that you reviewed his book on the body snatchers, but when we spoke with him, he was bringing up the fact that he thinks that there was no bodies and a bunch of other strange facts like that about Roswell. I was just going to say, what was your opinion on his book?
Well, I like Nick. He does more research than most people do. I think the problem is that he was dealing with secondhand stories that didn't match the testimony of the first-hand witnesses. It's a very creative explanation, but there's really nothing to back it up. I mean, a Fugel balloon carried aloft by the two German Horton brothers flying wing, and to expose them to radiation. See, what I have to offer in that regard is his story was that this was to do radiation shielding experiments, find out how people reacted to radiation, put them up in a balloon. Well, I worked on the aircraft nuclear propulsion program, the one he was referring to, for 3 solid years. When I worked on it, it was a big program. Back in the 40s, it was a very little program, hardly any program at all, as a matter of fact. And that's not how you do shielding experiments. You have to measure dose rates. You have to have controlled conditions. Radiation levels in a balloon vary. How do you control for anything? So that's one that I can certify. And he said the program died around 1956. That's when it went full tilt. But he was talking about testimony from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and they became the little brother on the program, not the big brother. When I worked at General Electric from 56 to 59, in 1958, specific example, we employed 3,500 people, 1,100 of whom were engineers and scientists. We spent that year $100 million. That was a major program. That was a lot of money back then. I mean, today maybe it's peanuts to some people, not to me. So that was a particularly unfortunate choice of whatever people told Nick. No, there was certainly nothing in the newspaper articles about bodies. Of course not. Nobody ever said there was. And people weren't really talking extraterrestrial at that time. The first Gallup survey, only a small percentage of people thought that was a meaningful explanation. Secret Russian systems, that may be, secret German systems. There's a new book out, Roswell and the Reich, by a guy named Farrell, and he says it's secret German technology. He quotes me very liberally, misrepresents me as somebody who worked on black programs, and I never did. Calls me a certified nuclear engineer, and I'm a physicist, not an engineer. University of Chicago didn't have an engineering school. But again, that one doesn't stand up either. So the body story came later. I heard about bodies, and not the first time around with Jesse Marcel. Some of the stories about the plains of St. Augustine, that second story I heard up in Bemidji, Minnesota, that had bodies involved in it. And, there was occasional other testimony later on, but this is all research from digging, not from, there it said in the New York Times. Nothing at all. Of course there weren't bodies talked about, and a good reason for that is given in the one of the Majestic 12 documents. I think there are 4 real ones and well over 100 phony ones, but it's the real ones that matter. They said that they were found 2.5 miles away. In, I guess you'd call it a crew compartment today. We didn't have those terms back then. There was no space program in 1947. For people who were too young to know, the first Sputnik didn't go up until 1957, as a matter of fact. But, so, no, I don't have a picture of a body, and I've debunked the Ray Santilli footage for a variety of reasons. I talk about it in one of the books, in Crash at Corona, as a matter of fact. But, so, do we have everything we want to know? Of course not. Look, I worked under security for 14 years. I've been to 20 archives. There's tremendous amounts of information that is still classified. Now, I get some people saying, Stan, come on, they declassify everything after 25 years. That is simply false. There are over 200,000 pages of classified material at the Eisenhower Library, for example. Even in an office in 1961, still classified material. There are lots of it. The National Archives are loaded with classified material. So we haven't got to the bottom of the Roswell story. We have enough testimony to say that the United States government recovered actually at least 3 crash flying saucers, but in New Mexico. We certainly don't have the analysis of the materials, the pictures of the bodies, the analysis of the biology of the aliens, or anything like that. Secrets can be kept. There's a whole chapter in Flying Saucers in Science about the cosmic Watergate. I give examples of massive programs that were done in secret. The stealth fighter is a good example. Lockheed spent $10 billion over a period of 10 years to develop the stealth fighter in secret. No public discussion for 10 years. The Corona spy satellite gave us more information about Soviet military capabilities, a very important question after all. In its first successful flight in 1960, after 12 failures in secret, more information than all the U-2 flights that had preceded it. Do we go public and say, look what we found? First public word about Corona was 1995, 35 years later, by which time, of course, the technology had enormously changed, as you can imagine. I give many other examples of large-scale programs that were kept secret. So, I'm sorry, but the Reich doesn't fit, and the damaged Japanese people doesn't fit either. Alien bodies fit.
Exactly. Well, a couple of questions. These are kind of really short answers. They're not really long. How many people have you interviewed on Roswell? Just like a rough estimate.
Well, as I said, way back when, within the first year and a half, Bill Moore and I talked to 62 people. By the mid-90s, it was, by the mid-80s, it was 92. And so I'd add a few more dozen since then. Now, not all of them were standing around watching the bodies of the craft. They were people who knew what was going on hither, thither, or yon. And it's not only me, after all. You've got Don Schmidt and others, like Kevin Randall, Dennis Balthaser of Roswell, people who have really been digging into this for years. So anybody who depends on only his own work is a fool. Take advantage of other people's work. So it's a lot of people. It's not 2 or 3 or 4, and it's not the local nut group, you know. Are there phonies out there? Of course there are. Are some of the stories completely untrue? I exposed, along with others, guy named Frank Kaufman, who was claiming he knew everything about everything and knew all the scoop on Roswell. And finally, not too long before he died, when I pushed him, he admitted that no, he hadn't taken Colonel Blanchard, who was the base commander, out to the crash site. No, he hadn't taken Jesse Marcel out to the crash site. He had no involvement at all, but he fooled some researchers for several years.
Well, another thing that I was wondering was, how many credible witnesses do you think that are helpful do you think there still are?
How helpful what?
Like, how many credible witnesses do you think that are still out there that could help you?
Oh, you mean the ones I don't know about? Not many. I mean, after all, we're talking about something that happened 63 years ago. So I think there are probably dozens of first-hand witnesses who were involved in the cleanup out on the crash site, for example, who helped load the airplanes. We found some of those people, but not all of them. As a matter of fact, in Roswell, 2 years ago, I guess, a guy for the first time ever came forward and talked about his being involved. He was grabbed and, you and you volunteer to come with me now. They went out there and picked up pieces of strange material that, it was interesting how he described it. He had a gunny sack. It's a burlap bag. I hadn't heard that word in years. And you'd pick up this stuff, this very lightweight, metallic sort of material. You'd fold it as you picked it up, and put it in the bag, and it unfolded as it went before it hit the bottom of the bag. Interesting description. So there are probably many dozens that we don't know about who were, say, at Wright Field, who examined some of the wreckage at the Lovelace Clinic, who examined it at Los Alamos, who examined the bodies at probably Brooks Air Force Base as well as at Lovelace. In other words, the tentacles go out in all directions. And there were the people who worked with Majestic 12. It wasn't just a dozen people listed in the briefing document for President Eisenhower. That was the top dogs, but there are always working people behind the top dogs, after all. So, it's like the Manhattan Project to develop nuclear weapons. 60,000 people were involved. The very great majority not having any idea of what they were working on. When the needle moves this way, turn this valve this way, that kind of thing. Didn't tell them that, hey, there's uranium in there.
Well, Oh, you go ahead, sorry. Well, I was going to say, do you think that you'll find out any like major information on Roswell in the future, or do you think that the majority of it is already out?
Well, certainly the majority of the data isn't out. Whether we'll be able to find out any more in the future is a moot point. People are dying like flies. I'm 75, and I'm probably the oldest of the active researchers on it, but I was a young man when I started. But what it might take is somebody who, like retired General Dubose, said, what can they do to me now? He was in his 80s, late 80s. There may be some people who are disgusted with how the government is operating, who think the public is entitled to know more about what's going on, who may have kept back documents like the Majestic 12 documents. And also, we may attract the attention, finally, of some journalists who want to do a Woodward Bernstein, like in All the President's Men, the Watergate business, who may start digging in. The press has been miserable in its approach to UFOs. They haven't done their homework. They're afraid to admit that they'd ignored the biggest story of the millennium for over 60 years. And there's an ego thing here. They take, New York Times, let's say, Washington Post, they take great pride in keeping up on everything that's important in the world. That's their job. New York Times, all the news is fit to print. Now, if this were real, they would all admit, if aliens were visiting Earth, if saucer had crashed at Roswell, if the government knew all about it, and all this sort of stuff, if that were true, that would be a big story. But if it would be a big story, they would know about it, and they don't, so it must not be, and they're not going to waste their time trying to find out more about a story that they're sure can't be real because they would have known about it. Circular reasoning, this is called. I've yet to see a major paper, for example, quote from retired Air Force General, wasn't retired when he said it, he wrote a memo, Carol Bolander was his name. In 1969, he was asked, what should we do about Project Blue Book, the Air Force program on UFOs? The University of Colorado study, the so-called Condon Report, had recommended in early '69 that it be canceled. It wasn't contributing much to intelligence or technology, which is certainly true. Anyway, he had nothing to do with it previously, so it was a completely fresh viewpoint. He's a good engineer. He worked on the Lunar Excursion Module, which was successfully used in 1969 when we landed on the moon. And he wrote a memo which resulted in the demise of Project Blue Book, which included this sentence. He said, moreover, reports of UFOs which could affect national security are made in accordance with Joint Army-Navy Air Force Publication 146 or Air Force Manual 55-11 and are not part of the Blue Book system. That's a shocking statement. But 2 paragraphs later, he went even beyond that. He said, if Blue Book is closed, the public won't have a place to report a sighting. However, as previously noted, reports which could affect national security will continue to be investigated using the procedures set up for that purpose. Here's an Air Force general saying that, and I talked to him before he died, of course. I don't know how to reach him once they've gone over. And he knew exactly what he was talking about. They're separate channels. In other words, let's say a saucer goes down the runway at a Strategic Air Command base where nuclear weapons are stored. That's a national security problem. Nobody's supposed to be going down the runway there except cleared people. If you and I were standing at the driveway at the end of my garage and look up and see a saucer flying by, big deal. That happens all the time. It's the ones that could affect national security that are the important ones. I know of no newspaper that has ever quoted that statement. I quote it every chance I get. So what I'm saying is that it would take some effort. You know, Watergate didn't get exposed by one guy spending a couple hours in a filing cabinet. 2 guys spent a lot of money, Woodward and Bernstein. Follow the money, that was the name of the game. And they had some inside sources, Deep Throat, for example. We need some deep throats to tell us a lot more about what's been going on. I mean, when you have multiple witness radar visual sightings involving very sophisticated military reconnaissance planes, sightings that last for over an hour, when you have a 747 being circled by a huge UFO twice the size of an aircraft carrier is reported on radar on the ground and radar in the sky, that's worth digging into. But yeah.
Well, I've ordered your Recollections of Roswell DVD today off your website, and I was just wondering, is that some of your more recent interviews or more recent?
No, none of them are recent in there. It was based on work done for the Fund for UFO Research, which helped fund people to go out and talk to the witnesses. Almost all of those people, though, can't be interviewed again because they're dead. There are 27, there's first-hand testimony from 27 witnesses. It's listed on the website, www.stantonfriedman.com. And for people, I mean, it's, how long is it? It's 105 minutes, I think. It gives you a chance to listen to first-hand witnesses, not somebody saying, well, Joe told me, Bill told me that John told him. I handled some of that wreckage. One of the witnesses, for example, is Dr. Jesse Marcel, Jr. He's a retired colonel in the Army, a helicopter pilot, flew 225 combat hours in Iraq. Iraq. We did fight a little battle over there, I guess. He handled wreckage himself. He was an only child. His Dad showed him some of the wreckage.
Mm-hmm.
He saw the symbols on the wreckage and has drawn those the best he could from memory. People like that, he's a medical doctor, I better add, a flight surgeon as well. It's kind of interesting that to illustrate the failure of the media to do its job, Peter Jennings in his mockumentary, that's what I call it anyway, way back on February 24th, 2005, they interviewed Jesse, and they didn't mention that he was a doctor, that he was a serving colonel at the time, got called back in at age 68, would you believe? We're pretty hard up, I guess. I mean, that's nothing against Jesse. I'm just saying, when you talk about an army, you don't think about guys being 68 and out there on the battlefield. They never bothered to mention that he was a doctor, a colonel, a combat pilot, et cetera, et cetera. They interviewed me, too, for an hour. They used 20 seconds and called me a promoter twice. I was certainly promoting the search for truth. They weren't.
Well, I know we had Jesse on our show, and he said that he just wrote his book or whatever, and he was saying that he was actually going to meet with you a little bit after, is what I think. I think that's what I recall he was saying.
Well, he and I've been at his home, and we see each other at conferences. I'll probably see him in Roswell in early July. I wrote the foreword to his book, The Roswell Legacy. That's listed on my website, too, for people who worry about such things. I consider him a first-rate, patriotic American, in the best sense of the word. And when I hear people talking about, oh, there weren't any decent Roswell witnesses, boy, that makes me boil.
Well, we had Frank, is it Fescino, is how you say his last name?
Fescino.
Well, yeah, well, we had him on our show about a week ago, and he told me that he wanted me to bring something up when we spoke to you.
Oh, okay.
He wanted me to bring up the Monster Quest episode, and he said that said they trashed your guys' research, or he basically said that they ruined what could have been a really good documentary, is what he was saying.
Well, yeah, I was there. I spent 2 days and was interviewed at great length. It didn't run up here in Canada, but from everything I've heard, I got a very small part in the picture, and they left out all the crucial stuff. They misrepresented everything, and it was a very sad spectacle from talking to Frank and talking to a number of others who, let's say, raised an eyebrow in my direction.
Well, I know it's online for free on YouTube if you're still curious and want to watch it. They have the whole entire episode on there.
Well, I got it. I picked it up at my post office box in Maine. They finally sent me a copy. They were supposed to send it right away. I can see why they didn't. And I haven't bothered to watch it yet. I just had to get. I had to get the new book in a week ago, so I've been trying to get caught up ever since. That's one of the things on my list. It's not tops on the list.
What's kind of ironic is, out of all the interviews we've done on the show, we've interviewed probably about 10 people that have been on Monster Quest, and every single one of them said that they didn't do a good job.
Well, they didn't. They did it. You know, it's funny. They did a good job of interviewing people, of setting things up, of filming. I thought they were going fine. It's what happened after they got the film in the can that really fouled things up. And they made it sound like we were saying that that monster is still around. Frank had given them all kinds of pictures and stuff and drawings, solid stuff. And I heard most of the interviews. I wasn't there for all of them, but for almost all. We were out at the actual site. Yeah, they screwed it up, to put it
simply. He said they interviewed you and him for like 6 hours one day, is what he was saying. He said they used like 5 minutes of the footage, and he said he was being interviewed all day, basically.
Yeah, I put in 2 long days. We were interviewed both out at the site where things happened, and then in the hotel, I sat there for, it was hours, literally hours. They covered a wide scope, and I was favorably impressed because they asked sensible questions. You know, I do lots of interviews. I've had a lot of experience with this, and I was favorably impressed. Boy, they did a nice job there. Then when I heard what was shown on the air, I lost my respect for what happened. That kind of thing, the media, I guess you're part of the media, but it's a different part. It was kind of like I was on Nightline, Ted Koppel. I was on with Philip Klass, who was the noisiest negativist of them all, wrote 4 anti-UFO books, etc. Anyway, the subject was supposed to be the government cover-up. And so I go in there with my blacked out government documents. Oh, you can't bring those in. Yeah, but that's what we're talking about. Here's proof. I'm sorry, you can't bring those in. So we argued for a few minutes. You never win those arguments. And then people said later, when they sit us down, we're sitting 2 feet apart. You can't look at each other. You look at your camera. Phil, you look at your camera. Don't look at each other.
Wow.
Where was Ted Koppel? I have no idea where Ted Koppel was because I never saw him. Not even on a monitor. I heard him in a little thing in my ear. He could have been in Timbuktu for all I know. People asked me the next day, how was Koppel? I said, I don't know. What do you mean you don't know, Stan? You were on with him. I'm sorry, but I never saw him. So television is weird that way. The truth is not what it's all about. It's entertainment. It's one person's vision that is nothing. Well, there's Phil again. We did a contentious program in Detroit, and they said you can't bring anything with you. As soon as we get in, he pulls a clipping out of his pocket. No, that was Phil, all right. But it's funny. It's not funny. It's tragic, really. But Phil was on one time with Dr. David Jacobs, who's written several books about UFO abductions. He's a professor at Temple University in Philadelphia. And at the beginning of the show, his book, The Threat, I guess it was, Larry King asked Phil what he thought of the book. Oh, those people all have psychiatric problems. Now, Phil was an electrical engineer, certainly not in a position to judge the psychiatric well-being of people that he had never met and knew nothing about it other than what was in the book. The man who wrote the foreword for the book was Dr. John Mack, a psychiatrist, mind you, from Harvard University, no less. He was in a position to do some evaluation psychiatrically. Well, halfway through the program, I don't know what possessed Larry, but he asked Phil, did you actually read the book? Long silence. No. I mean, come on now. What kind of... This is the way we get at truth? You ask opinions from people who haven't even read the book? I mean, I don't care if somebody wants to talk about my book. Let them do it, but let's read the book first.
Exactly. Have the facts to back it up. Well, another question related to Flatwoods was Frank was saying that the ship, I guess you could say, that the Flatwoods creature came out of, I guess he said that it was damaged as if it was crash landing, or he said it was having trouble landing or something?
Well, it seemed to have come down in the only place in the area where you wouldn't come down into trees or rough ground or anything like that. I was there. I mean, not when it happened, but we went up there later, many years later. 50th anniversary, as a matter of fact. Yeah, it seemed to have difficulty, and they found fluids and little pieces of stuff, which the Army carried away. Frank's the only one who ever got an interview with Colonel Levitt, who was notified from Washington to check things out up there and brought troops up there. And so something was wrong with it, yes. And apparently that's why it came down. And this, whatever it was in that, I'll call it a hazmat suit, because if you look at the good drawings made by Frank with consultation with the first-hand witnesses, and I've talked to those witnesses, Mrs. May, who's now deceased, and her son, he's not deceased, at least when I saw him when we were doing the show. This was a device that it wasn't a biological monster. It was a physical one, not physiological, a device. And so this thing moved down the hill a bit and eventually took off since it wasn't found there. But the fact that it left these fluids and these little pieces of stuff certainly indicated something was wrong with it. I mean, who knows what these pieces were, and we'll never find out what the analysis of them was, that's for sure. So, yeah, it was in trouble. And, you know, there's one of the foolish arguments that gets used against UFOs, or against Roswell. How could you come hundreds of light years away and crash? That's ridiculous. Well, in the first place, nobody's saying that what crashed is the vehicle that came from another star system. We ourselves use a two-stage system. We have big aircraft carriers, which are very large, if you've ever seen one. They're huge, 80,000 tons, something like that. They can operate for 18 years without refueling. We nuclear guys, this is nuclear-powered aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
They carry about 75 little airplanes, which can run for, an hour or two without refueling. Much smaller, much more maneuverable. They operate in one realm, in the air. The aircraft carrier operates on the oceans. We have the motherships that come from other stars here. They disgorge their bunch of little Earth excursion modules, I like to call them. Look, we set a huge Saturn V up when we go to the moon. 365 feet tall, 33 feet in diameter. Monster. It's impressive. In my movie, Flying Saucers Are Real, it's on DVD, I'm walking alongside this one down at the Cape. And it's big. You know? And you have that, and look at the little, in Flying Saucers and Science, there's my picture with my hand on the Apollo 12 command module. That's not very big at all. Doesn't look anything like what we were told a high-speed aircraft ought to look like, you know, pointy nose, sharp wings, highly streamlined. It's a big, round, blunt body, but it's sure a lot smaller than the Saturn V.
Yeah. Well, Frank wanted me to bring up another thing to you. He specifically told me to bring up the burnt material and the dead tree at the Flatwoods site.
Yeah, we had guys looking at that stuff. I don't think we found anything very exciting in the sense that nothing definitive as to why the tree died. I can guarantee you that the first time I was there on the 50th anniversary, that's 2002, most of the tree was there. This time there's practically nothing left. So it was rotten, and what happened, why, I don't know. It's kind of weird. There are plenty of other trees around, and they all seemed healthy enough. So whether the thing had anything to do with the demise of the tree, I can't guarantee you. I didn't find evidence of an unknown tree disease.
Well, Frank also was saying the case where there was a creature that was seen the second time. I'm not exactly. It said like a man, a woman, and their child. I'm not exactly sure what that's called. But
yeah, over in Frametown, West Virginia.
Yeah, do you think that was the same creature? Like a similar creature?
I don't know. I don't know. It's conceivable, but I didn't fingerprint both.
Okay, so do you do Flatwoods like in depth, or does Frank like the main guy for that sort of thing?
That's Frank's bag. I encouraged him to go public. I helped dig out stuff. I encouraged him to dig out all those, that incredible number of fatal military crashes, which are in the book. Shoot Them Down. I wrote the foreword for the book, and Frank went to the New York Times and dug out 200 fatal military plane crashes between like 1951 and 1955. And the New York Times used words occasionally like disintegrated and disappeared. And 5 of the pilots had over 100 missions each in Korea when MiGs were trying to shoot them down, you know? You got to be a pretty good pilot to survive that. They come back to the United States, no MiGs here, and the planes crashed. So it's very high on that. And we also found clear-cut evidence, because we called upon some friends of mine who dug out old clippings and all the rest, that orders had been issued, military orders to pilots to shoot them down if they don't land when instructed to do so. Now, how you tell an alien, hey, get your plane down on the ground, buddy? I don't know. I mean, you can picture a whole bunch of cartoons living up to that one. But what I'm saying is that Frank dug those out. And also we found that there was a general attitude. 1952 was the biggest year in Project Blue Book's history. Flatwoods happened on September 12th, 1952. And there's a statement in one of the MJ-12 documents that things really picked up in May. And that was certainly true if you look at the Blue Book files. So there's an awful lot we have not been told.
Well, shoot them down. That was actually my next question that I was going to start asking you. Do you do a lot of the shoot them down, like the interviews on things like that, like the jets chasing the UFOs and things like that?
I've talked to some people. The most interesting conversation I had was with a guy who was a Navy pilot stationed in, I think it was South Carolina. He was on duty, and he had a call from the command center, scramble, get up, there's an unknown out there. This is in the evening. So he takes off, and he's talking to the guy who's vectoring him toward the UFO. He gets up pretty high, and he looks, can't find the UFO, looks down. Oh, there it is, way down below. Suddenly it takes off straight up, and it's ahead of him and heads toward him. Brilliant beam of light. He holds up his hand. You can see his bones in his hand. And so he was under instructions to shoot it down. He pulls the trigger, nothing happens. The guns hadn't been loaded. The plane had been sitting out there without guns being loaded. And when he landed, he's talking to the guy at the other end of the radio, you understand, while this is going on. Mm-hmm. And when he finally landed, he was interrogated for a couple hours by guys in suits and guys in uniforms who were very interested in what had happened to him. And this guy, incidentally, went on to be a lawyer. That may not be a good recommendation to some people. But what I'm saying is he was a respectable citizen. And it was a fascinating story, and he didn't change it. The second or third time I asked him about it, everything stayed the same. So that was quite fascinating. And you can understand why the government would not want to say, oh, by the way, we've lost a number of pilots to UFOs. I have heard 7 different instances of more planes going up to chase UFOs than came back down. And Uncle Sam certainly wasn't going to admit to the public that, oh, yeah, these saucers are shooting our planes down all the time. Look, if I've heard 7 stories, there's a lot more than that out there. And for people who say, come on, the government isn't going to lie to families of pilots who die and stuff. Sure they are. There's a book, By Any Means Necessary, by William Burroughs, Burrows, and he focuses on reconnaissance planes that were, to use the military term, tickling the radar of North Korea, Russia, and China in the late 40s or mostly early 50s and stuff. They would fly in and see how quickly the foreign radar went on, what frequency it was using. This would be vital knowledge if you're going to have to deal with them in battle, electronic countermeasures and so forth. 166 crewmen died in planes that were involved in this stuff. Not one word in public. Their families were all lied to and told, lost at sea, sorry. Then the government finally in 2001 called a meeting of all the families and gave them the medals that their husbands or sons or whatever had earned. That's the first time they found out what happened to them. Incidentally, we shot down some Russian planes. Didn't say anything about them either. What I'm saying is there's a whole world out there that is not in the public eye. And the best sensors for detecting unusual objects flying in the sky are all military. Air Defense Command radar, spy satellites, all this stuff. That data's born classified. I mean, You got the NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, annual black budget well over $10 billion a year. They're in charge of the big spy satellites. Some of them cost $500 million for one device. So there's a lot going on, and we don't have access to that.
Exactly. Just like I know the Russians have also scrambled jets to fight to intercept UFOs. Also, is what Frank was saying. Also, and he brought up something pretty amazing too. He said the Russians even have dash cams of them chasing UFOs.
Well, there are certainly people who have taken film of the UFOs they've chased after, and as a matter of fact. One story was interesting to me. I was in Indiana University in Indianapolis, their campus, and I did my usual thing at the end of the lecture. I asked how many people here believe they've seen what I would consider to be a flying saucer, and about 10% of the hands went up. And then I said, how many of you reported what you saw? And 90% of the hands went down that had been put up. Were any of you in the military at this time? A few hands went up. Then I said, you want to tell us about it? One guy, I looked at one guy in particular. He didn't stand up. He said, they took my pictures. And long silence. And I said, well, I'm sure the audience would love to hear the rest of your story. I'm not asking you your name. You don't need to stand up. But tell us what went on. Everybody clapped. So he remained seated and told us that he was flying a 4-engine Air Force plane across the Pacific. Another plane 20 miles ahead radioed to them that saucer coming your way. They had gun cameras. They took pictures. They radioed the base to which they were going because the crew doesn't handle the film. That's an intelligence function. Told the guys that they had film with them. They landed. The film was taken by the appropriate people, and they were all debriefed and told never to say anything. So we get a lot of stories like that around. When the truth comes out, it's going to shock one heck of a lot of people.
Oh, well, do you know of any recent stories from, like, modern times where the military was chasing after UFOs is a question that's being asked?
I haven't heard many recently. I don't spend a lot of time going after individual cases. There are way too many of them. My big focus in my lectures is on the large-scale scientific studies. It's one of the things that made me angry at I don't know if you saw the Larry King program. I guess it was rerun yesterday, and it was on a week ago Friday, with Stephen Hawking and Michio Kaku and Seth Shostak, an astronomer. You didn't see it?
Oh, no. Oh, we didn't see it, but we heard about it.
Yeah, Dan Aykroyd was on. He was the only one who knew anything about UFOs. And there were some really dumb comments made by these very brilliant people. I will acknowledge Stephen Hawking is one of the outstanding astrophysicists in the world. But what he said clearly indicated, and all the others too, except for Dan, there was not one mention of any of the large-scale scientific studies. The whole program was precipitated by Hawking saying, we shouldn't make ourselves known to aliens. They're probably out there, but they might come along and do to us what Columbus did to the natives. Now, that's a really, I hate to say it this way, it's a really stupid thing to say. In the first place, it means he knows nothing about all the evidence indicating that aliens are coming this way and have been for at least 60-some years. Actually, you can go back in biblical times, thousands of years. Secondly, it seems to misunderstand that Columbus had a little technology that the natives didn't have. Not much. He had muskets, he had big sailing ships. But consider the aliens coming here. What do we have? Well, we've got hydrogen bombs, we've got atomic bombs, we have spy satellites, we have intercontinental ballistic missiles, we have laser weapons. Any reasonable alien is going to be very wary of us and is going to be very concerned about our putting our knowledge of nuclear fusion reactions, that's what powers H-bombs, to use for propulsion systems. So none of these guys were saying anything that made any sense. Science is not supposed to be a dartboard with numbers on it. You throw your darts and see which number comes up and then check the list. Oh, that means, let's see, that's number 37. Okay. You go from facts and data and evidence. And there was plenty of it, and no mention except from Dan. He mentioned my name, too, so I have to say nice things about him. He did. He mentioned the book Captured by myself and Kathleen Martin. But he mentioned MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, be at the symposium this July in Denver. But it was a truly incredible example of people talking about a subject about which they absolutely knew nothing and which made no sense. If any self-respecting alien is going to keep tabs on the civilizations that might represent a threat to him, why are we spending $620 billion this year, the United States is spending, on things military? A lot of that for reconnaissance, for spying, for making sure nobody sneaks up on us, pulls another Pearl Harbor kind of thing. You think aliens are so stupid that they're not going to be on the alert until somebody shows up and blasts them? That's ridiculous.
It is.
Well, Stanton, I have a question. This is really strange. It's kind of just for fun to see what you have to say about this. We've been talking to a couple people over the last couple years, and this guy named Thomas Costello keeps coming up. And I guess what it is it says in Dulce, New Mexico in the 60s, it says under Project Plowshare. I don't know if you know what that is.
I know what Plowshare was, yes.
They were saying that there's something to do with aliens having a war with humans or something along those lines.
Well, there's a guy named Schneider who started stories like that. Phil Schneider, I guess his name was. But let me straighten out. Plowshare was an attempt, a sensible attempt really, to see if we could use nuclear weapons to remove a lot of dirt. In other words, you want to dig a huge harbor. Set off a bomb in the appropriate place, and you got yourself a nice big harbor, a heck of a lot cheaper, than trying to use bulldozers, so to speak. There was also talk about using bombs, explode them underground to make large cavities in which you could store natural gas, for example. Mm-hmm. And there was talk about digging another canal across the Isthmus of Panama. And boy, you could sure dig it a heck of a lot faster if you used a bunch of nuclear weapons. I mean, people sometimes forget the difference between, say, an explosive and a nuclear weapon. Just another bomb. Well, it isn't just another bomb. A big bomb during World War II was a 10-ton blockbuster, 10 tons of TNT, basically. The first H-bomb, 1952, released the same amount of energy as exploding 10 million tons of TNT. Mm-hmm. Not 10 million tons. So Plowshare was an attempt to do something useful with nuclear weapons, besides threatening your neighbors, which is, I suppose, useful to some people. Okay, so there's no question there are underground facilities in many places in the United States for two major reasons. People may have forgotten there was a Cold War going on for a long time, So the two major reasons were, A, to stay away from the other guy's satellites, so he couldn't tell what you were doing, and B, to protect you in case somebody dropped an atomic bomb on you. If you were down far enough, a couple thousand feet down, you'd be safe. You might not enjoy it when the bomb hit, but you'd be safe. And so it's not surprising. I've talked to people who tried to find any evidence whatsoever at Dulce, and there's a conference coming up there too, incidentally. Forget the name of it. It's in New Mexico. It's a very pretty area. I haven't been there. I've been to Mexico, but not in Dulce. So I have found no evidence that there were battles underground between us and the aliens, and they killed 60 of our people. I heard.
Oh, you know that story?
Say that again?
I say, oh, you know that story?
Yes, I've heard that story. These stories go round and round. And,
I was going to say, it almost sounded like a fairy tale or something at first. That's why I thought it would be almost kind of strange to bring up to you.
Well, no, I'm glad you brought it up. It's one of many, quote, fairy tales, I like the word, that have been spread around. There are all kinds of stories. Look, I've got people who tell you, I know I've heard of people who tell you Friedman is a disinformation agency, working for the government. Total hogwash. That doesn't keep people from spreading the story. I once looked at I've got to check it again, at Wikipedia, and one article about me said he's worked on paper studies. Paper studies? General Electric aircraft nuclear propulsion, $100 million spent in '68, and I spent a few $1 million of it on radiation shielding experiments. Hardly a paper study. So what can you do? There are lies out there. There are false stories. There's no way to stop that, especially with the Internet. The test of the Internet is what is said true. It's can you get it out there? True doesn't matter. There's a lot of garbage on the Internet.
Oh, I'm sure if anybody, you've heard plenty of. Oh, I'm sorry, I was going to say, if anyone, I'm sure you've heard your share of lies, huh?
Well, I've heard a lot of lies, yes, and it's like I mentioned in this book about Roswell and the Wreck, the third Reich. He's got me as a certified nuclear engineer who worked on black programs. I'm not an engineer, and I never worked on a black program. But couldn't keep the guy from saying it in the book. What the heck?
Well, one thing that I was personally wondering, do you know anything about the Ely, Nevada UFO crash of 1952?
Where in Nevada?
It's E-L-Y, Ely, Nevada.
Oh, yeah, Ely. I've heard the story, again, this is back just a few years ago that I heard it. And I know a MUFON guy out that way, and he couldn't find anything to support the story. I think he would have liked for it to be true, but look, anybody has it. If they go to my website, that's got my email address, got my phone number. I'm in the book. Fredericton, New Brunswick. There aren't any other Friedmans here now. People want to ask questions, let them feel free. The website is www.stantonfriedman, FRIEDMAN.com. My email address is FS as in flying saucer, PHYS as in physicist, flying saucer physicist, at Rogers.com. That's easy. So I'm easy to reach, and if anybody really knows something as opposed to third-hand stories, I heard it from Bill, who read it, and something written by John, et cetera, et cetera. You can't do much with those. Somebody's got to get back to the original story. That's the nice thing about Frank Ficino's work on Flatwoods. He talked to the primary witnesses.
Well, there's a couple of things I was going to bring up regarding the Ely UFO crash. Recently, within the last couple months, me and another guy on our team have actually been looking up through tons of documents and things like that on this Ely UFO crash, and we actually talked to two people that claim that they know. One guy says he was actually there. The other one is a woman, and she says that her husband actually was there. And I was just wondering if you knew anything about that, because no. I know we were actually planning on going out there, and we were going to start seeing if we could figure anything out, or see if we could. I was going to see if we could.
Good luck.
Some sort of.
I don't know anything that would back up what you just said. I'm not saying it isn't true. I don't know if it's true or not. But one problem you run into, I had a guy call me one time. He'd heard me on some radio show. And he said when he was young, when he was 11 years old, the librarian used to let him look at the newspapers in the more adult part of the library. And he remembers seeing on the front page of, it was an Alabama newspaper, I can't remember if it was Birmingham or probably, but and he saw pictures of a crashed saucer out in the desert in 1947. He gave me the name of the paper. He was sure there were pictures there with bodies and wreckage. Well, that came as quite a shock to me because I've been at this a long time and nobody's ever told me that before. So I called the newspaper and talked to the librarian who dug out the papers, and yes, they had a picture on the front page about Roswell. The same picture everybody else had that was taken in General Ramey's office in Fort Worth, Texas. No bodies, not out in the field, no real wreckage. Now, I don't think he was lying to me. I think he was well-intentioned. That's the way he remembered it. It's like somebody once checked and found that there were far more people saying they were there when Babe Ruth hit his 60th home run in Yankee Stadium. They could have fit in the stadium. You know, they heard the story and put themselves in the picture, so to speak. So I don't know. It could be true. I'd be interested in hearing more. But
I was going to say, I could provide you with the stories and things like that if you would like. I could forward you some of those things because I know we're trying to figure more out about this. We're trying to figure out more about any of these like lesser known crashes, like the Ely UFO crash. We've been getting people like bizarre ways. Like we've been putting out ads on the internet saying if anybody knows anything about this, and we're paying to like put a classified ad out in their paper and things like that. We're getting people in bizarre ways. That we got 2 people so far.
Well, I admire you for doing that. I mean, people have often asked me, how can I find out more about the sighting? I guess nobody else saw it. I said, wait a minute. I remember getting 2 calls on 2 successive nights about a saucer being seen over Los Angeles, 9:30 in the evening on a Sunday in March. Beautiful weather, a lot of people outside. And so I did some investigation, and then I got a local paper to run a letter from me saying I'm a nuclear physicist who collects reports of UFO sightings, and I have a report of something that happened Sunday night. It didn't give a lot of details. I would very much like to hear from other witnesses. Here's my phone number. Here's my mailing address. Witness names won't be used without permission. This was before the internet, you understand. And I heard from 30 people. And they were so glad because they had tried to report it and they got laughed at. Found one person who had binoculars and could see that it was a candle in a cleaning bag with a little platform holding a candle. And it came down on the Wilshire Country Club lawn, and I talked to the fire chief. And he wasn't about to go public because this would have had every kid in the neighborhood trying to do the same thing. It's a real fire hazard out there. It gets very dry. But seeking more witnesses brought me forth, and it also gave me a test on the visual observation skills of the witnesses. Nobody described anything extraordinary. Just a darn red light in the sky sitting there where there shouldn't have been one. Witnesses are pretty good. They may not be able to interpret what they see, but they're pretty good if you keep them from interpreting, get them to observe. You know, not how big was it, et cetera.
Well, what's odd is we're actually working on writing a book on our Ely UFO research and just some of our interviews that we've done. And I was going to see if you knew anything about it, like I said, or if there's any way you could help us at all. Like
I've heard the story through MUFON, and Linda Moulton Howe has done something about it. She's got a high profile in the field, and has talked to some people out in the Ely area. I want to say Eli. What?
From what we understand, it crashed near a place called Copper Canyon or Cooper Canyon. Is how I think you would say that.
I can't verify one way or another.
Oh, well, anyways, that's where the general location, like the general area where we have so far, where people are telling us, and we're actually going to head out there probably in about a month, actually. And I was going to say, if there's any way we could provide you with any information, if you could try to help us at all.
Well, send me some notes or a couple of the articles, and let me see if I can dig through my files and find anything that might be of use. Have you talked to Linda?
Not actually. That's the first time I've heard her name.
She's Linda Moulton Howe, Moulton Howe. Has written a couple of good books. She has a website that gets a lot of attention. Just Google her, and you'll put quotes around the name, and you'll get a lot of hits.
Well, also, if you search the Ely UFO crash, you search it in Project Blue Book, because I don't know if there's a website that's up now where they put the microfilm online, and you type in a keyword, for instance, and it'll search through all of them and pull up every page that has those keywords.
Yeah.
Just from, because I barely found that website the other day, actually. I searched the Ely UFO crash, and it said like 1,400 pages came up. I haven't read through all of them yet, but
there's a huge amount of stuff out there. I mean, I used to put my name in just for kicks and get, in half a second, it can tell me that it's got 47,613 hits on my name. I find that kind of silly, but that's the way it is, I guess. So there's people repeat what other people repeat what other people repeat. Yeah. And Leonard Stringfield put out a paper in which he had over 60 crashes listed. And so I can't guarantee you that that one was one of them, but I would suspect it was.
Well, also, just in general, do you know of any sort of crashes or anything along those lines that's happened in Nevada, or because we all live in Las Vegas? I was just wondering if something that that's nearby, like Ely or something like that we would be able to investigate. I was just wondering.
Have you talked to George Knapp?
Not yet. He actually keeps ignoring our emails, which is ironic.
He's a very busy, very good reporter for KLAS in Las Vegas. And there was a case that he was digging into. It wasn't Eli, I'm sure.
It was Needles, wasn't it?
Yes, you got it, Needles. And he was looking into that one. It's, as you have found, as soon as you stick your foot in the water, you're going to be swamped. The water rises quickly. And sorting out the good from the bad. I mean, you can get wire service stories. I got mad at, there's a guy who's a new senator who used to be on Saturday Night Live, and I did a program where he was one of the people, and, well, Roswell couldn't have been a big story. It only appeared in a local paper. I had sent the program copies of articles from the Chicago Daily News, from the Los Angeles Herald Express, from the Sacramento Bee, from the Spokane Chronicle, and several others. And they had given him the articles. I guess he didn't look at them. Only appeared in the Roswell paper. Nonsense. But he said it. What can you do?
Well, another question that I had about searching old files and things, where would you go to look up, say, old newspapers and things like that, like you see people doing?
There are several different places. A place that I used to go to a lot was the Library of Congress Manuscript Division in Washington, D.C., and right around the corner in the same building there is a file of an incredible number of old newspapers. And the University of Missouri Journalism School in Columbia, Missouri, has an incredible compilation of, a lot of it's on microfilms, but, and so, and there is a service, but I can't remember the name of it, where you can pay a nominal amount and get access to clippings on anything from anywhere kind of thing. It's amazing how much stuff has been scanned and is out there and so forth. One thing that hasn't been, a lot of the stuff at the various archives, presidential archives and others, has not been scanned. So you can't sit at home and look through all this stuff. You got to go there. Too bad.
Well, one more question before we take some callers. We have a bunch of callers that want to ask you a question.
Okay.
Do you think that there's more to Project Blue Book than they release to the public? And also, do you think that there's a modern Project Blue Book that we don't know about that they have, most likely?
Well, I hope it's much more like a modern Majestic 12 than Project Blue Book. I visited Project Blue Book way back in the early 60s several times, and I was not terribly impressed. But if we go back to what General Bolander said, reports which could affect national security are not part of the Blue Book system. So, yeah, there was another channel to which the good stuff went. How you get access to that? Boy, I don't know. Wish I could. So, yes, I believe that the government has continued an ongoing investigation. Not worried about, little lights in the sky, which would drive you crazy if you let them. But looking at the good stuff picked up by those classified sensors, the radar systems, the spy satellites, etc. You and I don't get a look at those, but they're out there.
Well, right now, I gave out our number on here so people would start asking us some questions if we have some questions. But I have some questions from Sutton Farm and the Aurora UFO crash that I was going to ask, but if people are going to call in with questions, I'll ask those later. But
okay, there is another one I should mention. That's the one in Aztec, New Mexico in March of 1948. There'll be a new book out within a few months by Scott Ramsey and his wife Suzanne, who have done an incredibly good job. That was a fairly large object that was carted off by the government, and they spent a fortune, but they've collected the data. Very impressive. I will write the forward for that one too.
One thing that I was wondering personally was, what's your personal opinion on alien abductions?
Well, each case has to stand on its own merits. And, for example, my book captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. My co-author, Kathleen Martin, is Betty's niece, has all the hypnosis tapes and stuff. I'm absolutely, totally, completely, 110% convinced that they were abducted. The psychiatrist who did the hypnosis was a world-class expert, I guess I can say, on helping people break through the problems caused by PTSD, stress problems. Your buddy's head gets blown off in battle next to you. It's not easy to go on living in a sensible way with that sticking in your mind, so to speak. Post-traumatic stress disorder, for what people were wondering what I was talking about. And so he ran a 3,000-bed hospital after World War II with patients whom he helped. He made the movie, Let There Be Light, with the Army, explaining how he helped these people get back to normal lives. Not all of them, but most of them. And so some abductions are real. Are there phony stories? Of course there are. How can you stop it? I talked to a local police officer. I said, when you have a high publicity crime and you ask the public for their cooperation, you get much response? He says, oh, yeah, we get hundreds of calls. I said, what percentage are useful? Well, 2 or 3, but that's how we solve most crimes. So you got to, the question isn't, are all abduction stories true? The question is, are any? And the answer is very definitely yes. But each case has to be taken on its own merits. You can't say that because the Hills were abducted, that means Mr. and Mrs. Jones were abducted. You have to investigate that case.
Well, something that I was we have a caller on the line that has a question for you, Stan. It's from 205 area code. And you're on the air, 205.
Hey, this is Alan
Hello.
down in Alabama.
Yep.
And Stan, I was just wondering, this is something that came up recent, a few months ago, whenever, about maybe writing a book, like a memoirs or an autobiography. I was just kind of wondering if you've given that any thought, or is that a possibility? Just pretty much wanted. It'd be kind of cool. I'll go get it.
Can somebody repeat that question? I'm not getting it.
Oh, you're not coming?
Yeah, could you repeat your question, please?
I was just wondering, on another podcast that came up a while back that about Stan considering maybe a memoirs or an autobiography as maybe a future book.
Oh, me doing that? Well, there's been some talk, and I've thought about it, and I might do it. And this new book is finished, and might as well do something useful. There will be an announcement about an interesting project that I can't go into details on July 2nd in Roswell at the International UFO Museum that involves Hollywood and me and other people, and keep your eyes and ears peeled. I've thought about doing memoirs, a memoir. Everybody else does, why shouldn't I, you know? my life and times or something like that. But and there are some interesting stories along the way, and I'm considering it, let's put it that way. It isn't written.
Thanks.
Okay. Everybody, when they get old, wants to write their memoirs. When I've been around, I mean, I've lectured in 50 states, 9 provinces, and 16 other countries, and done hundreds of radio and television programs, and worked on a lot of exciting projects. They were canceled, but still, they were exciting. Any other questions? Getting late, guys. I'm on the East Coast. Well, I'm
941, you're on the air?
Yeah, this is Jamie Havigan. I got a question for Mr. Friedman.
Okay.
Have you heard about the outcome of the X conference? Have you talked to anybody? And because I heard it wasn't going too good, I just wanted to see if you've talked to anybody about the outcome and how it went.
Although I raised the question to somebody by email today, and I haven't seen anything yet, so I don't know. It was this weekend, so.
Yeah, and one other question. Have you ever worked with Clark McKelland?
Loosely speaking, I knew him many, many years ago in Pittsburgh. Late 60s, I lived in Pittsburgh, and we had a UFO Research Institute, and he was down in Florida. He was the NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, representative down there. I did some checking on him after a couple of strange stories went out and found that, how shall I put this? He overstated his background. How's that?
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who do that. Yeah, and I felt that I checked a couple of colleges and stuff, and also some of his comments about Werner von Braun didn't strike me as being appropriate from people who worked with von Braun. So, you know, I'm not going to say terrible things about him. I'm just saying it didn't check out.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for answering that, and we'll see you around. Thanks, guys.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep.
Yes. When he called in, randomly, everybody on the call lines randomly got muted for some reason. That's why it was like awkward silence there for a minute.
Oh. The aliens are listening.
Well, we have another caller.
Okay.
We have another caller from a 901 area code, and 901, you're on the line.
Hey, this is me. I'm Bill.
Oh, hey, Bill.
How's
you had
it
a
going
question
tonight?
for Stanton?
I
Pretty
did.
good.
I also had a comment as well as just a question. Just a quick little comment there, Stanton. You and I met at Mid-South Con last year in March.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I had an article that I had written about the Fermi paradox that you read, and you kind of gave me some pointers, I guess you might say, about about Professor Fermi, which I really appreciated. And I actually went back and I re-edited that article sensitive to the things you had mentioned to me about your actual personal experiences with the man, and so I wanted to let you know that I really did appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Good.
The question I had, though, is about from all these crashes, have you come across any evidence of, like, the shadow government or the black projects or whatever, to having successfully back-engineered any of this alien tech, and that it might be actually in use by our government or some government?
Well, that's a good question. And some people want to give the aliens credit for all our technological advance. Much too fast, we couldn't have done all that ourselves. And I'd like to point out to people the huge amounts of money that were spent in the United States, and Russia too, for that matter, and on advanced technology. I mentioned the aircraft nuclear propulsion program. $100 million in 1 year was spent on that program. The stealth fighter, $10 billion over 10 years. That's a lot of engineers and scientists, I think that we have learned some things. An example I gave early on, which came back to not haunt me, but which pleased me, you would send out pieces of material from people in charge of handling the wreckage to the best labs that you know of which have appropriate security clearances. And you'd send out to different places. There were plenty of labs that had security clearance. After all, we just fought a war in 47. I mean, ended in 45, but they knew where the good guys were, and the Cold War was heating up. So you send out your stuff, and you ask a guy, the lab guys, you don't need to tell them where you got it. They don't have a need to know for that. What is this stuff? And the guy comes back and says, it's a combination of samarium and cobalt. Why would you put those together? That's not your problem. Thank you very much. You get it to other people and you say, what are its electrical and magnetic and nuclear and thermal characteristics? And the guy comes back and says, I don't know where you got this stuff, but I measured the highest magnetic moment of any material I've ever measured. Make a great permanent magnet. And pretty soon people are building ghetto blasters whose permanent magnets are made of samarium and cobalt. So you haven't learned how the thing flies, but you've learned something useful. Well, I used to use it as an example, and then I for 6 years did a weekly science commentary for a local radio station here in Fredericton. And I'm reading an article about new and better permanent magnets, neodymium iron boron. Wow! At the back of the article, the original work on samarium cobalt was done at the Wright Air Development Center at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I just laughed my head off, but I know where that idea came from. A second, in my book, Flying Saucers and Science, there's a picture of me with my hand on the Apollo 12 command module, as I mentioned earlier. And it may well be that somebody said, these saucers are moving awful fast. They're certainly not like airplanes in their shape and stuff. Why don't we do some wind tunnel tests on some disc shapes? And as a matter of fact, at Wright-Patterson, they did in the late 1947. And it may be that the reason we wound up with a round, blunt body as the command module moving at 25,000 miles an hour when it hits the atmosphere, instead of a streamlined X-15 kind of thing, is that somebody thought, gee, if it works for them, maybe we can figure out how to do that too. So what I'm saying is you learn directly, but consider the situation. Christopher Columbus gets approached by a couple of aliens and say, hey, Chris, you're a great explorer. Got a project for you. I've got a nuclear submarine here, and I need 2 more of them, and you have an unlimited budget. Could Chris have built one? Of course not. So I'm not saying that it is possible for us at our level of technology. I mean, let's face it, go back 110 years. No aviation, no space, no nuclear, no all kinds of things that we take for granted, There are stars out there not very far away that are 1 billion years older than the sun. Who knows what they know? that we don't know and can't figure out because we can't make the measurements well enough. So I think we've learned some things, and we've tried. I hope we have. That would be one of the functions of the Majestic 12 group, was to try to figure out from the wreckage and from observations of the flight patterns of the saucers taken by military gun cameras, for example, you put those together and try to work backwards and say, gee whiz, what's this strange stuff? How can we do that? Let's try this, let's try that. And
so what you're basically saying is instead of back engineering, it's basically re-engineering, where we get the ideas from this stuff and then re-engineer it ourselves.
Yeah, the aliens aren't stopping by. Hey, can I sell you, 10 square feet of this? kind of thing. Let me give you an example. Adolf Hitler, knew that you could build rockets, so he spent a lot of money on development of rockets. He didn't know that you could build an atomic bomb soon enough to be of any use to him in the war. So he spent a lot of money on rockets and very little on atomic bombs. The Russians, on the other hand, after the war, knew that you could build atomic bombs. We had tested 5 of them. Mm-hmm. So if their first one doesn't work, they'll keep at it because they're as smart as we are. So knowing that what you're trying to accomplish can be accomplished gives you a big leg up. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I would point out that the official invention date, if you will, of the transistor was in December 1947. It was done at Bell Labs. Publicity didn't happen until June 48 because of patents and other things. But Bell had an outstanding, probably the world's outstanding electronics laboratory. Mm-hmm. So it would have been one of the places that would have been sent stuff that might be up their alley. So the first transistor was a very simple-minded little device, a point junction transistor, a little piece of germanium and a wire and so forth. What may well have been seeing a piece of alien stuff that got a guy scratching his head saying, hey, let's do that again. Maybe we could do something like that and take it from there. Mm-hmm. In other words, you stimulate the new direction, even though you don't get a blueprint from the alien saying this is where you buy these guys. Mm-hmm. So I leave room for that. Remember, during World War II, there was a lot of reverse engineering going on. If a German plane crashed in England and wasn't destroyed, we would have engineers looking at that and try to figure out what materials they were using and how fine their tolerances were and a lot of other stuff like that. Standard practice. Mm-hmm.
Hey. Well, actually, we have about 27 minutes left in the show, and since we're not getting any more callers at the moment, I was going to see if any of my team members on the line actually had any questions. Did you have a question, Nick?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Nick.
Oh, I was going to say, well, in your opinion, Mr. Friedman, I heard that what is your this question may have been asked already. What is your opinion on reptilians or reptoids?
They're in my gray basket at best. When I don't have enough data, the problem goes into my gray basket. A lot of stories. It's just look, I've pushed Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli as the home base for the aliens who abducted the planet around one of those two stars, for the aliens who abducted Betty and Barney Hill. And there's a whole group out there called the Zetans or the Zeta Reticulans and stuff. But it's funny, I couldn't find anything by them written before I published the first article about the star map work relating to the Hill case. If they'd known about this all along, how come they hadn't said anything before somebody else put it out and somebody glommed onto it? So, I'm wary, very wary of a lot of stories.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Well, I was going to bring up the Aurora UFO crash. You probably get asked about that one a lot.
Not a lot, some.
Some? I don't know, what would you rather talk about, the Sutton Farm incident or the Aurora UFO crash?
What was the other one besides the Aurora one? What was the
Sutton Farm, where the aliens were trying to get into their house. It was in the 50s.
Oh, you mean in Kentucky? I guess it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they're both interesting, and I've talked to I guess he's dead now, a reporter for the Dallas paper who did a lot of checking on the Aurora case back in the 1890s. And he found some people who had been alive at that time and had heard the story from various and sundry people. And so I leave room for that having happened. I can't prove it didn't. Can't prove it did. Nobody's found the pieces of stuff or the body that was supposedly buried in the local cemetery. And some people went after it, foolishly tried to dig it up themselves. You don't dig up people's cemeteries without incurring the enmity of a lot of people in the neighborhood. Well, as you can understand, you know. So the other case is intriguing just because of the whole sequence. You know, blasting away with guns and hitting these guys, and they bounce away and coming back at it and climbing over the roof and looking in the windows. And, yeah, very strange story. And, you know, the thing is that once the word went out that, oh, those idiots over on planet Earth, they're showing signs that within 100 years they're going to be able to come here and bother us, we better be checking them out. So I can see graduate students from external universities coming here to do their thesis work on the development of a primitive society. Well, you know, we are pretty primitive. You know, some people get mad at me. What do you mean we're a primitive society? Look at all the great stuff we've done. And I wish to point out that this year, collectively, the people on planet Earth will spend over $1 trillion on things military. That's a lot of money. 30,000 children die every single day of needlessly of preventable disease or starvation. That's two striking numbers. You could feed all those people very well with that $1 trillion, couldn't you? So how do we look to others? Maybe we're the only planet in the neighborhood where people don't all speak the same language.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe where people are all the same color. Aren't all the same color. But this may have been a penal colony, and that's why we're so nasty to each other. And so we got sociologists from alien universities checking out what's with those guys. You know, we don't have a great track record.
Well, a question I was wondering about the Aurora UFO crash. I was going to say my questions on Aurora, then go back to Sutton Farm.
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you seen the UFO Hunters that was on about a year ago on the Aurora UFO crash, where they found the windmill and the unmarked grave, and they did like the ground penetrating and all that?
Well, I didn't see the program because the U.S. History Channel doesn't run in Canada. I live in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, folks. 73 miles from beautiful downtown Holton, Maine. And I'm a dual citizen, so I complain about both governments quite legally, you understand.
Well, I know that because they said that there's a bunch of skeptics that were saying that it never existed, and I guess they used ground penetrating radar and things, and they found like a windmill, like pieces of wood where a windmill once was. And they actually used ground penetrating radar in where the grave was supposedly at, and they found proof that there was a grave where it was supposed to be at. And they also they went inside the well, and they said that they were randomly finding, with all of the different types of evidence they were finding, they were all relating somehow to high concentrations of aluminum. I wasn't sure if you knew anything about that or not.
I'd heard about that. John Schuessler, who was for many years director of the Mutual UFO Network, had done some checking on that. He lived in Texas for quite a few years. And I'd heard some of those stories, and the reporter from the Dallas paper had mentioned some of those as well. So I can't say it didn't happen.
Well, one thing I was wondering, I don't know if you know about this, what exactly happened to the spaceship? They always talk about the body, but what happened to the spaceship or whatever he was in?
I don't know.
Nobody knows?
Who knows? Maybe their friends came and took it home.
And another thing that's peculiar, if there is a body in the graveyard, don't you think that it's kind of odd that the government or nobody like that has tried to dig it up over the years?
Maybe they dug it up a long time ago without saying anything.
Well, a question that's being asked in our chat room, somebody has a question for you. They say, do you have an opinion on the Phoenix Lights incident? It says, they've heard and read many different ideas and theories from many researchers, and they're wondering what's your solid opinion on it.
Well, I've talked to people who witnessed the lights, and I'm convinced that between 8:15 and 8:30, from northwest to southeast, this huge flying wing shape, boomerang shape, whatever you want to call it, craft flew slowly over the Phoenix Valley, taking about 4 minutes to pass over a given area. It was seen by thousands of people. It made no sound. It moved quite slower than normal airplanes move. It was maybe almost a mile wide. It blocked out the sky. It was a clear night. Lots of people were out because of the comet. And so, it's not surprising that a lot of people saw it. Now, at about 10 o'clock that night, the National Guard troops dropped some battlefield flares way southwest of there. And those were filmed. You see, the word got on the radio about the Phoenix Lights. And there were people ready, in other words, when the flares got observed, not in the same area. And these flares come down in parachutes, so, they move down slowly. And yet the media confused the whole issue. They talk about the Phoenix Light, and they show the pictures of the flares, which weren't seen until 10 o'clock in another area, and didn't at all block out the sky or anything like that. So, and I also talked to Fife Symington, who at that time had been the governor of Illinois. We were both on the same Larry King show a few years back. Turns out that he had seen the lights, this huge boomerang-shaped thing. He'd been a pilot in the Air Force, and it sure wasn't like anything he had seen. He unfortunately chose to defuse the situation by, at a press conference, have somebody who worked for him come out in a big alien costume, if you will, and made fun of the whole thing. But years later, when he was on that Larry King show, he went public with saying that he saw it, he was a pilot, it certainly wasn't anything from here, and sorry about the confusion. So, and I've talked to others who were there, and a guy named Fortson did a good job of describing it. So, it certainly wasn't like anything we have flying. And it wasn't the flares. And I get a real kick out of James McGaha, a retired Air Force major who was a pilot, who said those weren't qualified observers. How qualified do you have to be to say it was very wide, it flew over slowly and silently and blocked out the sky? Do you need to be an astrophysicist? No, not at all. As a matter of fact, the Larry King show the other night showed that astrophysicists sometimes say stupid things.
Yeah, it sounds like an ad hominem attack.
Yeah. Oh, we have about 15 minutes left in the show, and I was going to ask you about 10 minutes on Stanton Farm before I get on a couple other things real quick. Do you personally, what's your opinion on the Stanton Farm incident?
On the what?
On the Kentucky Kelly incident where they were shooting at the aliens and things.
I think it probably happened. What was going on? I don't know. Whether these were a bunch of kids and their parents were flying the big saucers and these guys were dropped off, have some fun for a while, guys. I don't know. It's in my gray basket. I think something strange did happen, that strange beings were involved.
Mm-hmm.
What the purpose of all of that was, I don't know.
Well, I know from our interviews, somebody that was talking to us said that the Air Force was out at their house for, I guess, a couple days. And I was just wondering, I guess something happened because the Air Force thought it was important enough to go out there and start talking to them and things.
Well, yeah, the Air Force, look, the Air Force's job is to protect the United States by making sure nobody comes from the air to give us a hard time. That's their job. Now, the fact that much of what they develop is classified is beside the point. Of course they'd be interested. And they have shown there's plenty of interest, there's plenty of documents out there indicating the government's concern. They don't want to admit it publicly, and the media have aided and abetted them by putting out baloney. I mean, the Air Force reports on the Roswell incident, especially the second one, the Roswell report, case closed. It had the most ludicrous explanation you can imagine. These were crash test dummies. And there's two major things wrong with that explanation. One, none were dropped until 6 years after Roswell, so we have time travel for crash test dummies, which is pretty neat. And the second, I talked to the man who was in charge of the program. His picture's in the Air Force report. And he pointed out to me, Stan, the test would have been totally meaningless if the dummies weren't the same size and weight as Air Force pilots. They were 6 feet tall, 175 pounds. And I've seen one of the dummies. It's at the museum. So they got away with that explanation. Front page of the New York Times. So I bet somebody was laughing his head off. They bought it. Can you believe that? A totally stupid explanation. I mean, unless you think the Air Force developed time travel, or the aliens did, and came back from 53 to scare the people in 47. Which makes no sense either. So what I'm saying is that there's no question that they're interested. If they weren't interested, why did they put out 2 big, fat reports? They even lied about me in their reports, and I don't much like that.
So, back to a question I was asking you earlier, since we're on the topic. So, do you think that there's another report that's out, like that we don't know about, that the public's not allowed to read or anything? Or there's more to
I'm sure there are loads of them. I'm sure there are loads, certainly about Roswell. Look, I helped write classified reports when I was working in industry. I did a project that...
Oh, sorry, there's background noise on there.
I did a project where, for Aerojet General Nucleonics, we had a contract with the Air Force Foreign Technology Division, and I was looking at Russian technology to try to figure out whether they would be able to put a nuclear reactor in space. And I gathered all kinds of information and wrote 2 final reports. One was unclassified. It was a bibliography in about a dozen areas of technology, all kinds of references to Russian work. The other one, which I don't have a copy of, was my evaluation of what all this meant. Totally classified, not mentioned in the unclassified report. And as a matter of fact, I was probably the only guy in the country who was happy when I heard about Cosmos 954, one of the Russian satellites, crashing, and it had a reactor on board, because I had concluded that they were doing all the right things to be able to put nuclear systems in space. Turns out they put up about 35. Numbers differ. Some people say 37. I'm not going to argue. I don't know. But what I'm saying is there was an unclassified report which made no reference to this other report. And that's where the good stuff was. And it was funny. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Central Intelligence Agency. What was the composition of the reactor that was found? That was still classified, as if the Russians didn't know what their system was like. Which is pretty silly when you stop to think about it. And so there's tons of stuff out there that's classified. I'm not saying it should or shouldn't be, and some of it certainly shouldn't be, but When I was working in radiation shielding, people, I swear we had a classification officer who thought we were going to find a magic paint that we would use that would absorb all the radiation. So everything about shielding's got to be classified, including stuff that in the college freshman physics major would know. What are you going to do? You can't fight City Hall very well in that business.
Well, a couple of quick statements on Sutton Farm, the Kelly incident I was going to bring up to you. I thought this was kind of funny. The Air Force, they said their explanation for the whole entire incident, they said, was an escaped chimp from the zoo that was painted silver. And they said, and I guess they said that the news was taking pictures of the house that was full of bullet holes and things, and they were claiming that it was a chimpanzee that escaped from the zoo. And their explanation was that when they were getting shot and falling down, they said that the chimp was dodging the bullets because it's hard to shoot at, is what they were saying.
Well, you know, they used to have liars contests in the United States. Small towns would have liars clubs, you know, and they'd give a prize each week to the guy who came up with the best lie. It's part and parcel of the same picture. If you can get away with lying, I guess there are husbands who think this way when their wife asks embarrassing questions. You can get away with lying, and nobody catches you. You keep it up. That's why you lie, because it works. And like I say, the front page of the New York Times, upper left-hand portion of the page, best spot you can pick for an event in the country. That's where they had the crash test dummies explaining Roswell. It's incredible. And obviously, they made no attempt to get at the real facts of the matter.
Yeah, well, we have about 8 minutes left in the show, and I had a question about your current projects. Do you have any sort of books or anything you're investigating or anything like that right now?
On what projects?
Oh, no, I just said like any projects or books or anything you're working on right now.
Well, the new book, Science Was Wrong, will be out next month. That covers a lot of ground because it's not just UFOs. My book, Flying Saucers and Science, has a lot of work relating to different things that I've done. But right now, I guess we're going to promote the book, and maybe I'll do those memoirs somebody mentioned earlier.
Also, a quick question that was coming up on our emails. They were saying, do you know when you'll retire from ufology?
No.
Or like,
hey, I'm only 75. What do you want? I'm a young man. I've only been at this for 52 years. Somebody wants to take my place, go ahead. I must admit something now. I have to admit, I've never spent overnight in a hospital since I was born, and I don't remember that. But so I'm healthy, it says here in small print. So why should people say, when are you going to retire? And I say, what for? I like my boss, that's me. I enjoy what I'm doing. What's the point of retirement? Sit and watch television? No, thank you. Or play golf? I don't play golf. Too bad.
Well, I was also wondering, because right now, our team in particular, we're all in our 20s, like our mid-20s, and I was just going to say, our first book is actually coming out pretty soon, and I was going to see what you thought about that. I was probably going to send you like a couple of interesting points and emails or something. I was going to see if you're interested in that.
Sure. Send me a copy. I'll write your comment. I'll even read the book first.
Because I was going to say, I know, like, I wouldn't say it's general paranormal, like general, because what we're doing is, because we actually research, like, ghosts and monsters and UFO crash sites and things like that. But our first book is actually coming out on UFOs and our UFO things, like our sightings, people we've interviewed and things. And I was going to see what you thought about it.
Sure. Send me a copy. The address is in the on my website.
And also, right now, someone's asking us right now in our chat room. They said, They said that they're entering the materials engineering program at Rutgers University, and they want to know if you knew anything about that.
At where? At Rutgers?
Yeah, they wanted to know if you know anything about that program at that school.
I'm still not sure what the program is. We don't have a great connection.
The materials engineering program. They wanted to know. They sent me a second part of the question. It says, ask him, how can materials engineering program bring us closer to contact with extraterrestrials? Like, if you think that, I think, is what they're asking.
They're asking about materials engineering programs connected with extraterrestrials?
Yeah, they wanted to know if you think that could help bring us closer to contact with extraterrestrials, is what the guy was asking.
I don't see how it would, but look, the choice of how much contact we have with aliens is dependent on them more than it is on us. And I think, people are always asking, what are these guys doing here anyway? And in Flying Saucers and Science, I think it's 22 reasons for coming to planet Earth. They're broadcasters with a weekly show, Idiocy in the Boondocks. Of course, you guys know about that. I think they may have a zillion different reasons for coming here, but I think the primary one is they're concerned about our going out there, because I can't imagine anybody in the local neighborhood wanting us out there with our track record. In World War II, long before you guys were born, we Earthlings killed 50 million of our own kind. Now, I'm conservative. Some people say 70, but I'll say only 50. We destroyed 1,700 cities. Is that a good track record indicating we'd be nice guys if somebody approached us openly? Shoot first, ask questions later. That's the basic rule. Certainly in Texas it is, isn't it?
Yep.
So what I'm saying is we can't separate us from the world around us or the local galactic neighborhood. And you guys are all aware that we've discovered over 450 exoplanets, planets around other stars, not the sun. Well, it wasn't too many years ago that we were saying there were no planets around other stars. Instead of saying, look, our techniques aren't good enough for us to see them, even if they're there, we said there aren't any. Well, there are going to be a heck of a lot more discovered as the Kepler and Kourou satellites start shoveling in the data. There's going to be a lot of it. So we need to recognize that, A, we're not so smart, B, that there are guys out there who've been around a heck of a lot longer than we have.
Well, I'd hate to cut you off, Stanton, but we have about a minute and a half left in our show, and I was going to see if you wanted to say anything about any links or any websites or anything you would like our audience to know about.
Well, sure. I'd like them to know about my website, www.stantonfriedman.com. There's www.mufon.com, MUFON, the biggest organization. We need young blood, I'll guarantee you that. There is a lot of work to do to get up to snuff. I mean, we need the historical picture here. Oh, okay, you weren't kidding. We're almost over.
And one quick statement real quick. Next Saturday, we're going to be interviewing Art Campbell on the San Augustine UFO crash. I was going to say...
That's great.
I said, do you know anything about that or talked to him before?
I was the first guy to dig into that story. Yes, and Art has talked to me. We've spent time together. I shared a lot of information with him. He'll be a good guest, and he knows a heck of a lot about that case. Very good case. Say hi for me.
Oh, I will. Well, Stanton, we have about 50 seconds left in the show. I was going to say thank you for going on our show. We still have a lot of questions, so we'll have to do another follow-up in the future sometime.
Why not? But I'll be promoting my book, Science Was Wrong, starting next month. You'll find a lot to intrigue you, excite you, maybe disgust you. You never know.
Definitely.
Thank you for the callers, and thank you for my guests, my co-host, and thanks again, Stanton, for calling in.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stanton. You're still the best ufologist out there.
Thanks.
Never stop.